Hi, I wanted to share with you a really quick tutorial on how to use this new Red Orchid digital backdrop. When you're working with digital backdrops, there's a few things that you need to consider beforehand to make your photos look nice and realistic. Number one, lighting. You got to make sure that the direction of that light and the intensity of that light matches the backdrop that you're working with. You also want to consider your depth of field, and then you want to make sure that that perspective is just right. There's a few other things, but we'll talk about that as we go. So I'm working with a digital that's been shot from directly above. So that means I need to work with a baby that has also been shot from above. And in this instance, we're going to work with a set of twins. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool. I'm going to come all the way around the outside there. And right, I'm just going to feather that edge just a little bit. Now I'm going to copy that, Command C, and I'm going to take that into the digital, Command V. So you can see they've just been placed directly there in the middle. They are, surprisingly, the correct size. If they weren't the right size and they were slightly too big for this particular bowl, then what I'm going to do is just bring back the opacity there, about 70%, so I can start to see underneath, take it into Transform, Command T, and then I would resize the babies to fit in the middle of that bowl. So what I'm looking for is making sure that they are, nice and evenly placed there in the center, and there's a little bit of room around the top of their heads there so they don't look like they're coming into contact with that hard surface. So we'll just make it a little bit smaller and get them nice and centered. All right. First thing I need to do is to remove the edge there of that original file so I can start to see the bowl underneath. So I'm going to create and add a layer mask there. I'm going to go to my paintbrush. I'm going to use a black brush on my white mask. I've got the opacity there at 100, and I'm just going to come around the edge there. So if you wanted this to fit absolutely perfect there with inside that bowl, then you would zoom in and you would use a smaller brush and be more accurate in terms of where you're removing it. But for the sake of showing you a very, very quick tutorial, I'm just going to come around the edge there so we can start to see that shadow. Now there's a few things here that I want to match up. Number one, the colour of the fur that's around the babies with the fur that's underneath in the backdrop. So we turn that off. So we want it to match with that so we can blend it a little better. We're going to then add some shadowing then around the baby as well to make it look like they are really in there. Okay, so hit that backslash key, make sure I haven't missed any little areas there. I'll come up a little more just in case. All right. So I'm going to apply that layer mask now. Okay, next thing I want to do is now work on the colour tone of that wool that's underneath the baby. So I'm going to create a copy layer of the babies right now, and I'm going to go into hue and saturation. This is where I'm just going to adjust the tone here a little bit, bringing it down. So I can see that there's more red tones in that wool. So what I'm going to do is click on Master, come down to Cyan, and I'm just going to come across and sample that area, and you can see it's placing it roughly there in terms of the colour space that we're working with. We can move around and make sure it's a bit more accurate. I'm going to desaturate those reds, bring those down just a little bit. If I wanted it to be brighter, I would lift them, but I don't, so I'm going to darken them, about 15. You can pull the saturation down a little bit as well, and you can adjust your hue if you need to. So we're going to go up to about +2. I'm going to hit OK. So looking now, that's not too bad. So what I'm going to do is add a layer mask, and now I'm going to take that off at 100% off the babies. And we'll bring the hardness of our brush up just a bit. So just coming around the edge there. Can be a little tricky to get digital backdrops to work perfectly for you, but with lots of practice, you're going to find that they help speed up your workflow during your sessions because you can shoot specifically for them. And that's a plan, always sort of keeping in mind when you are working in the studio of what you are going to do with those photos later, shooting with intention so that you are getting that lighting right, getting the perspective right, getting the camera angle, getting the focus right, the depth of field, all of those things. When it's an afterthought, you can tend to see in the photo because it doesn't look very realistic. Alright, so just taking that off the babies, and now we're going to apply that layer mask. So the next thing I want to do is actually create some more shadow here around the babies, give them a little bit of depth. So I'm going to merge these two layers here. So hold the Command key in and then Command E, and you can flatten those two layers. Alright, so at this time I'm going to go to my background layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going just to add a little bit of depth underneath the babies to start with. So I'm going to create a copy layer. I'm going to come in and use my lasso tool. I'll zoom in a bit, and just around the edge of the babies, not all the way to the edge of the bowl, just in a bit of an even circle there. I'm going to feather that by 100 pixels. We'll give it a nice soft edge, and now I'm going to take that into curves. Command M. We're going to bring that information down. Okay. So you won't see it just yet, but you can see now I've started to darken that information underneath the babies. So now coming back to our babies, this is where I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to grab my paintbrush and I'm going to bring the opacity of that brush down to about 50%. You can leave the texture that's underneath the babies there in the bowl, still looks great, but we've got some beautiful texture underneath the babies around the edge if you wanted to bring that through. So I'm going to show you how I do that, and I can blend it as well. Now that I've got a similar texture and a similar tone, I'm going to come around the outside here and just slowly reveal the wool underneath. Find doing this with 50% brush just gives you that little bit more advantage when you're blending. Doesn't give you any harder edges. This is a great way to add variety in your galleries, and if you're posing twins like this, it's also great to be able to pose them safely on the posing bag or something similar, and then to bring them into something like this later on. Plus, setting up the time, you can shoot your own digital backdrops. It's going to save you time during the session, not having to fiddle with all of your little bits and pieces, getting them absolutely right. You can focus all of your attention on those babies. Alright, so now we have a little look at where we've painted there, and I'm just going to bring that opacity back up to 100 and just come around the wood bowl. Make sure we haven't got anything left there. Alright, so that's blended in and there's still a few bits there. I'm going to apply that layer mask. Now what I'm going to do is create another copy layer of the babies, Command J. I'm going to change the layer mode there to multiply, to darken them down. So you can see that there is still that information going there around the babies. Now I'm going to add a layer mask and I'm going to invert that, Command I. This is where at 100% I'm going to come around the edge of the babies. With a small soft edge brush to add some shadowing here. Alright, now I'm going to, still selected in that mask, come up to Filter, Blur, come down to Gaussian Blur, and this is where I'm going to soften what I've just painted on. So that's at 40, we'll bring that back, and let's start to move that slider up and blur what we've just painted on, but not too much. We just want to soften that edge there. It's at about 40. So you can see before and after, and we start to create that beautiful shadow. Now this is where you can start to take it off the babies as well. So you're still on that layer mask. We go to a black brush, nice big soft brush, so you can right click, reduce the hardness there, and start to take it off the babies. There we go. And then down here we've got that darkness around the babies is there as well. Now if you wanted to, you could darken that down even more, but I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I want to do is just add a little bit of softness. Actually, we might just darken it down just a tad. A bit more. So again, nice big feather. Go into curves and just bring that information down there a little bit. When you add that depth, it really does add that connects them so much more to the digital in terms of the shadowing, and adds that depth like we're talking about. Alright, so now what I'm ready to do is soften some of the wool that's in here as well. So I'm going to merge those two layers. I'm going to merge, sorry, we'll just merge these. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is create another copy layer, and I'm going to come up into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to blur the fur that's around the babies there. Not quite that much, but we'll take it to about 6. And then we're going to add a layer mask and invert that. Now what I'm going to do is just come around at 100% around the babies there, inside the edge of that bowl. And we always paint on at 100% to be able to give us that consistency in the layer. And then what we can do is bring back the opacity to suit. So I find that this just takes a little bit of the attention off that area, and you can play with that even more. So the last thing that I'm going to look at here, and we can flatten this now, take a snapshot, it's always great. The next thing I'm looking at is the contrast on the baby's skin. So we've got quite a flatly lit backdrop here, but I do want to add just that little bit more intensity in terms of the shadows so that it matches the babies. I'm going to create a copy layer, Command J. I'm going to go over here to my gradient tool, and I'm going to darken down this area, the bottom half of the frame. You can already see that the direction of light is coming in from the top, which is matching the babies, but we just want to increase that intensity just a little bit more. So I've got it set to multiply, and I'm also working with the first option, which is going to go from a solid color to translucent, transparent. So the direction that I draw my line from will mean that I'm going to draw from solid to transparent. So I can start at the bottom of my frame and work my way up, and it's going to bring that color up and across the image. So now let's go ahead, that you've seen that, and we're going to select the tone, and we're going to draw all the way up. There we go. So I'm going to add a layer mask, and you can increase the opacity and then bring back the opacity of that layer to taste, entirely up to you. But this is where now I'm going to use a black brush, and I'm going to take that off the babies. And also looking at some of those dark shadows around the bowl, we don't want to darken those anymore so that they become muddy and lose detail. So I want to remove that layer off the babies and off those darker areas and just darken down the outside as it comes up. So you can have a lot of fun. The possibilities are endless, and it's pretty amazing to see what you can create. You can change the colors of the background, you can increase your vignette, you could add a square crop to this, you could add lots of different poses in terms of positioning the baby in here. You could have the baby on their side with the head up towards the ceiling, you could have the baby on their back. But ultimately, what you want to do, like I said in the beginning, is make sure that you get that perspective right, make sure you get the direction and the intensity of the lighting right, and then obviously focusing on the main subject, and then making sure that you've got that depth of field right as well. So lots to consider when you're working with digital backdrops, but they do allow you to add so much more variety to your galleries and spend more time focusing on the babies than creating individual setups throughout your sessions. I can't wait to see what you create.